What happens when Ted Lasso comes home only to discover that Richmond is no longer the place he left behind? Ted is back in London. He has a new team, a new challenge, and, surprisingly, some very old problems waiting for him. But this time, Ted isn't coaching the men who turned him into a football legend. He's coaching a women's team that Richmond barely knows how to support. And before he can even think about winning matches, Ted has to solve a much bigger problem. He has to convince the people around him that this team actually matters. And one person in particular doesn't want Ted anywhere near the job. Her name is Alice Chilton. She wanted the position Ted now has, and she's already prepared to walk away. Meanwhile, Coach Beard is quietly struggling with the same question he has been avoiding since Ted left. Does he really belong beside Roy, or does he belong with Ted? By the end of this episode, two major pieces fall into place, but getting there forces Ted to confront something he has never been especially good at. Not coaching, not motivating, but accepting that sometimes people don't need Ted to save them. They need him to listen. This is Ted Lasso Season 4, Episode 2, Curiouser and Curiouser. After more than 3 years away, Ted Lasso is finally back in Richmond. But the first thing we notice is that he isn't exactly living like the Ted we remember. Instead of returning to his old home, Ted is staying in a rented room above the Crown and Anchor, and May, the longtime Richmond superfan who runs the pub, couldn't be happier. To her, Ted's return feels like Richmond has finally got one of its favorite sons back. Ted, meanwhile, is trying to settle into his new life. He has made the decision to leave Kansas and return to England. Michelle and Henry are expected to join him soon, and now he has a completely different job. He is going to coach Richmond's newly created women's team. For Ted, this should be exciting. But there is one immediate problem. Richmond hasn't exactly prepared for this team to succeed, and Ted discovers that almost immediately. At his first press conference, the reporters aren't particularly interested in the women. Instead, they keep asking about Richmond's men's team. It's almost as if the new women's side doesn't exist, and that tells Ted something important. The biggest challenge may not be what happens on the football pitch. The biggest challenge may be changing the culture around the team. Ted soon learns that the players don't even have a proper locker room. They've been squeezed into an inadequate space with limited facilities. For a professional football club, it's embarrassing. And Ted doesn't understand how Richmond could have created a women's team while giving them so little. But this isn't the only problem. Rebecca has invested heavily in the team, and Higgins has been examining the numbers. His report isn't exactly encouraging. The financial future of the women's team looks uncertain. If the investment fails, the consequences could spread to the men's side as well. Suddenly, this isn't just a feel-good experiment. There is pressure, real pressure. Rebecca has put Richmond's money behind the project. Now she needs it to work. And Ted has to build a successful team while the clock is already ticking. But before he can coach the players, he has another problem. Someone who already works for Richmond doesn't want him there. Her name is Alice Chilton. Alice has been helping hold the women's team together. She knows the players, she knows the game, and most importantly, she believed the head coaching position should have been hers. Instead, Rebecca hired Ted. Alice doesn't hide her anger. She confronts Rebecca and makes her position very clear. She is disappointed that Richmond never seriously considered a female candidate for the job, and then she announces that she's leaving. Ted has barely started his new job, and one of his most valuable potential assistants is already walking out the door. But Ted doesn't react the way Alice expects. He doesn't argue. He doesn't tell her she's wrong. He doesn't give her one of his famous speeches about believing. Instead, he starts trying to understand her, because Ted notices something that everyone else seems to miss. Alice isn't angry because she doesn't care. She's angry because she cares too much, and that realization is about to change everything. Ted begins getting to know his players, and immediately the Lady Greyhounds prove they are not going to be an easy group to manage. There is talent, there is personality, and there is plenty of chaos. One of the most memorable players is the goalkeeper known as Boots, and Boots has an unusual relationship with pain. She refuses to wear goalkeeper gloves. Why? Because she wants to feel everything. Every shot, every impact, every painful save. It's strange, it's reckless, and somehow completely fitting for the world of Ted Lasso. Ted starts looking for the personalities underneath the personalities. He wants to understand what makes these players tick. But Alice doesn't seem impressed by this approach. She believes football should be taken seriously, and she has years of experience proving that she knows what she's doing. Then something happens during training. One of the players gets seriously injured, and Alice reacts instantly. She rushes to help. She doesn't hesitate. And later she refers to the players as our team. It's a tiny word, but Ted notices. Because Alice may be furious with Richmond, she hasn't stopped caring about the team. And Ted realizes this is his opening. He starts looking deeper into Alice's history, and what he discovers explains much more than her anger. Alice was once a promising football player herself. She had a future, but an injury changed everything. Her playing career was cut short, and instead of walking away from football completely, she moved into coaching. Now Ted understands why the job matters so much. For Alice, this isn't simply a promotion. This team represents a part of the life she lost. And Ted does something that makes Alice realize he isn't trying to replace her. He tells her that he knows her story, not the version people whisper about, the real story. He knows what happened to her career, he knows about the injury, and he understands why she is so protective of these Claires. Alice has spent the entire episode building a wall around herself, but Ted doesn't try to knock it down. He simply shows her that he understands why the wall exists. And eventually, Alice gives in. She agrees to stay, not as the head coach, as Ted's assistant. It should feel like a victory for Ted, but it also creates an interesting question. Can two people work together when one of them wanted the other's job? Ted seems confident. Alice, not so much. And while Ted is solving one coaching problem, another old relationship is quietly falling apart. Coach Beard. Since Ted left Richmond, Beard has remained with the men's team. Roy Kent is now his boss. And on paper, everything should be fine. But something clearly isn't. Beard misses Ted, Ted misses Beard. Neither man seems willing to say it directly. Eventually, the two meet privately at the pub. But the reunion isn't exactly what we might expect. It's awkward. There is affection between them, but there is also distance. Years have passed. Their friendship survived Ted leaving, but it didn't survive unchanged. And Roy notices. Roy may be terrible at talking about emotions, but he's surprisingly good at recognizing them. He knows Beard wants to leave. He knows Beard wants to return to Ted. And Roy realizes that keeping Beard on the men's team would only make the situation worse, so he decides to do something unexpected. He lets Beard go. But Roy being Roy, he can't simply say, go be with your friend. Instead, he finds a technical reason. Beard has supposedly violated one of Richmond's rules. It's enough to give him an honorable way out. No betrayal, no dramatic argument, just a convenient excuse. But Roy is really giving Beard permission to follow his heart, and Beard is about to make his choice. But before that happens, another relationship begins heating up again, Roy and Keeley, and this time even they can't quite pretend nothing is happening.
Meanwhile, Keeley steps in to improve the women's terrible locker room situation. She manages to secure the visitors' dressing room, but there's one problem. Roy has turned it into a psychological warfare zone for visiting teams, complete with traps and even a trained rat named Jonathan. As Roy and Keeley work together, their old chemistry becomes impossible to ignore. They insist they're just friends, but the tension between them is still there. At the same time, Roy realizes that Beard wants to run to Ted's side. Instead of holding him back, Roy creates an excuse to release Beard from the men's team. Then, just as Ted convinces Alice to stay, Beard arrives with the news that he's coming back. Ted and Beard celebrate their reunion, but Beard's wife Jane watches from a distance, clearly unsure what his decision means for their marriage. With Alice staying and Beard back, Ted finally has his new coaching team. But the real challenge is only beginning. By the end of the episode, Ted's new coaching team is finally complete. Alice agrees to stay, Beard returns to Ted's side, and Rebecca commits fully to supporting Richmond's women's team despite the financial risks. But beneath the optimism, serious problems remain. The team still has to prove itself on the pitch, Rebecca's investment has to pay off, and Ted must show that his coaching philosophy can work with a completely different group of players. Most importantly, Ted realizes he can't simply recreate the past. This is a new Richmond, and the Lady Greyhounds need more than motivation. They need respect, resources, and someone willing to believe in them. For now, Ted has his team, his friends, and a fresh start. But when the Lady Greyhounds finally face their biggest challenges on the pitch, Ted's optimism may be tested like never before. And that's where the real story begins.